And Viktor Frankl actually came along in the same period of time and said it isn't. He's wrong about that. He contended with Freud, and he said man's chief desire is not pleasure; it's actually meaning. And when he or she cannot find meaning, they actually distract themselves with pleasure, and that you will only forego pleasure because meaning is really the only thing in life that trumps it. And when we distract ourselves and don't have meaning, we it's a recipe for depression, anxiety, all that kind of stuff. Now he developed this theory in the early 30s, but as a Jewish man in Vienna, was sent to the concentration camps, was in 3 different concentration camps, lost his mother, his father, his wife, and their unborn baby.
Wow.
Tens of millions of other Jews, I think 3 million. Forgive me for not knowing that statistic offhand. So it was a crisis. 3 months after getting out of Auschwitz alive, 3 months after, Kris, he does a speaking tour, and he defends the idea that life is both meaningful and beautiful.
Wow.
And it was some of the most powerful writing I've ever seen.
Hi, welcome to Cultural Catalyst, where we teach you how to live fully alive, co-labor with God, and change the world. I'm your host, Kris Vallotton, and today I have Donald Miller, who wrote Blue Like Jazz. He's a New York best-selling author, public speaker, and business owner. I had to actually read all that because we've been friends for so many years. I'm like, what have you accomplished since I knew you last? And since I had you out, thank you so much for being on.
My pleasure. I've been looking forward to this conversation for a long time.
I got to tell you, a bunch of my team are in here because they're like, Donald Miller's here. We all read his books. So
it's downhill from here on out, team.
So excited to talk to you about owning your story and living a full purpose life. Life full of purpose is what they wrote here. See that? I'm even reading notes right now. Hey, conversation. What have you been doing? What are you up to? And what makes you alive right now?
One answer, Kris. I became a dad.
I know.
I've got a 16-month-old named Emmeline, who is the life of the party. She's pretty much been the life of the party since she came out of the womb. She is the happiest human. And I'm really not saying this. I mean, I realize no dad is objective.
Yes.
But I honestly think she's the happiest human being I've ever met. I mean, from second one, when she wakes up, she is filled with joy. And I bet you there's been 5 times when she's not been happy first thing in the morning through the rest of the day, and usually it's because she got a fever or something. So it's mostly figuring out how to be a good dad, being a good husband. That's the exciting thing that's happened to me over the last 2 years.
I have a granddaughter who's 2.5. Her name's Edie. 2 days ago, we were moving a very heavy massage chair upstairs, and my son Jason, that's her dad, brings her with him, and so she's standing there. And of course, my wife is trying to keep her out of the way, and she's going like this. Good job, you guys! You can do it. Oh, you guys, come on! You can get this done. 2.5 years old. She's saying that for the half hour we're trying to get this. It was like, I said to her, I need to bring her to work and just have her do that all day long,
Exactly. Every time you respond to an email, just have her clap.
It's so cool. Hey, you just wrote a book, Hero on a Mission.
Yeah.
And it's a pathway to a meaningful life that actually confronts the victim mentality. I have to be honest, I haven't read that book. A bunch of my team have read that book, and they're like, you got to interview him about this book. So why did you write this book, and why does it feel important to you today?
Yeah, it's that book came out in January. It feels like 5 years ago, but it came out in January, and I'd been thinking about that, the stuff that's in the book for about 5 or 7 years, and had kind of had some, how it is to try to write a book and you get 3 chapters into it, it's just not there. You're not
I do
ready.
know.
The ideas are half baked and all that kind of stuff. And finally, I thought, I think I've got it in me, and started it and finished it. But really, for me, the why of that book is because there's a psychologist, some might even say a personality theorist, called Viktor Frankl, who was a Viennese psychologist back in the 1940s.
Wow.
And he developed, well, at the time, Sigmund Freud there in Vienna was saying that man exists to pursue pleasure. It's the dominant desire of every human being, is to wake up in the morning and find pleasure or comfort or escape or whatever.
Yeah.
And Viktor Frankl actually came along in the same period of time and said it isn't. He's wrong about that. He contended with Freud, and he said man's chief desire is not pleasure, it's actually meaning. And when he or she cannot find meaning, they actually distract themselves with pleasure. And that you will only forego pleasure because meaning is really the only thing in life that trumps it. And when we distract ourselves and don't have meaning, it's a recipe for depression, anxiety, all that kind of stuff. Now he developed this theory in the early 30s, but as a Jewish man in Vienna, was sent to the concentration camps, was in 3 different concentration camps, lost his mother, his father, his wife, and their unborn baby.
Wow.
Tens of millions of other Jews. I think 3 million. Forgive me for not knowing that statistic offhand. So it was a crisis. 3 months after getting out of Auschwitz alive, 3 months after, Kris, he does a speaking tour, and he defends the idea that life is both meaningful and beautiful.
Wow.
And it was some of the most powerful writing I've ever seen. It is religiously agnostic.
Okay. I was just about to ask you that.
Yeah, but what was fascinating to me as a Christian was that you and I can get into theology of this. You're going to school me on it. But what was interesting to me as a Christian was that the formula that he was recommending or prescribing to patients in order to experience meaning was right in line with the way Jesus is telling us to live. And there are basically 3 components to it. One is you need to have a project or a vision or something that you're building. Everybody needs that.
Yeah.
It can be as small as, trying to learn the piano, or as big as trying to raise a family, or as big as trying to build a global church or whatever.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. He says, look, it doesn't matter. You need a project that occupies your time and that, requires you. He said the second thing you need is a community. That meaning will not be experienced in a vacuum. You will not experience it alone. You need this experience needs to be shared. And then the third, which is the most powerful of all of them, the most life-changing for me, was that you need a redemptive perspective on your suffering. And so what he meant was every human being will suffer. You need to find some place in your mind where you say, well, suffering is very painful, but it is also making me stronger, or but it is also making me more tender, or but it is also humbling me, or but you need a but also for every kind of suffering that you encounter. So they gave Viktor Frankl a job in the Viennese hospital system. The teenagers in Vienna were committing suicide in uncomfortably large numbers. And he went in and prescribed what he called logotherapy, which is basically the things that I just talked about. These were community groups in which everybody needed to identify a project, and then you needed to go through the most painful things in your life and accept them, acknowledge them. Don't be delusionally optimistic, but also say, wait a second, this is a mixed bag. It has also given me there's an upside to this.
Yeah.
And the suicide rate in Vienna, in that hospital system of which they were experiencing crisis numbers, ended, and not a single person committed suicide under his watch.
So, wow, that is powerful.
It's extremely powerful, and it's something that I discovered having sort of vacillated emotionally, up and down. I discovered that when I had a big project to work on or something important to do, I didn't struggle with. I'm not a person who struggles with depression sort of naturally anyway. I
Yeah.
understand there are people who are, but when you finish a book, there's a
Yeah.
crash.
Yeah.
You kind of like, why am I on this planet?
Yeah.
Exactly.
And why didn't that work?
Yeah.
Why didn't that book deliver, what we're going to get eventually in my theology at the wedding feast of the Lamb? Why didn't that happen when I wrote a book? Well,
exactly.
There's a reason for that. Anyway, so what I discovered with Viktor Frankl was when the credits roll on a story, you need to get yourself a new story quick.
Wow.
And essentially what you're really doing is distracting yourself from nihilism. And many of the personality theorists, and certainly most of the kind of humanistic philosophers, Nietzsche and Kant and Jean-Paul Sartre, they all ended up more or less subscribing to this idea that life was completely meaningless. And Frankl would say, look, you're not going to arrive at a position where you can sort of honor and experience the meaning of life by sitting down reading a book. You actually have to go do something.
Yeah.
And to me, that's where, when you lay that over sort of the book of Acts and this strong bias toward action, and I think James says faith without action is dead.
Yeah.
It made a lot of sense to me, and I've been living that way ever since. Let's see, that was 13 years ago, and I really mean it. There's been difficult days. I lost my mom.
Yeah.
Had a friend and a coworker commit suicide. There've been some very, very painful days.
Yeah.
But I've not felt in any of that, or a single day since, a sense of meaninglessness.
How do you, man? Let me say, that's incredibly powerful. Now I would really want to read the book. And I've kind of coined this phrase: vision gives pain a purpose. And I've been saying things like, your pain, if your pain has a purpose, it'll take you out of depression, out of that, victim mentality. How does your personal faith played into the meaning of life? Because I know you're a deeply committed believer. So you wrote this book, and you learned this stuff. How did your faith work into that?
A couple ways. One of the things that I believe is that, to some degree, and for some people, it's totally contextual, but that God doesn't always, in fact, mostly, I don't believe, tells you exactly what he wants you to do. He actually gives you some options.
Yeah.
And by options, I mean, it's sort of a conversation that you would have with your humanly father, saying, I think I want to be a professional bowler. And your dad kind of says, that could be fun, but it's probably the stupidest thing I've ever heard. What about it? And there's some guidance there. And, even Goose Hill, this place that we talked about before we started recording, Betsy and I live on 15 acres, and we developed it into this kind of retreat center, but you can't pay to come here. It's just for friends and family. There are currently, like right now, I think there's 20 people on property.
You got a lot of friends. That's part of your problem.
Yeah, well, these are every one of them is a family member. It's one of Betsy's family members.
Oh my goodness.
It's really that whole thing was a vision that I honestly feel, Kris, and you may correct me on this, I don't know. I feel like God and I dreamed it up together. It wasn't just, Don, I want you to go build an ark. This isn't an ark, which happens sometimes in our lives. So I want you to do something really specific. It's not going to make any sense to you, but I want you to do it. For me, it was like, hey, what do you love doing? We love hospitality, and we started building it, and the money kept coming in. And if I'd have known how expensive it was going to be, I probably wouldn't have done it.
Exactly.
But and that was really fun. And then there are other things that I feel like are callings in my life, and God and I go back and forth on whether that's my ego, whether those are my wounds, or whether that's something that we could do together. And but the most important thing is to always have something that you're working on,
beautiful.
Even if what you're working on is rest.
Yeah.
But have a clear vision of what you're trying to do here.
Bill Johnson, he's been my leader for 45 years. I've been with him 45 years. He coined this phrase. He wrote a book called Dreaming with God that basically embraces what you just said, in that the love chapter 13 talks about love, and it doesn't seek his own. It's not selfish, so on and so forth. We realize that God was talking about his love, the way he loves us, before he was ever talking about how we love one another.
Right.
And so
yeah.
we talk through the fact that, the Lord actually, he's not giving us commands. In fact, he says in John 15, I no longer call you a slave, because the slave does not know what his master is doing, but I call you friends. And so, we call it the benefits of friendship, that we actually co-labor with the Lord. We actually dream the dreams of God. We actually dream together, dreaming with God. So I love this, because we haven't seen each other for quite a while, but you're actually getting the same kind of things that we are, as far as your relationship with the Lord, and how how you built Goose Hill on co-dreaming with God kind of thing.
Yeah.
You have so many dimensions to your life, so many different gifts and passions. I follow you on Instagram. I follow tons of people on Instagram, actually, but I always stop and read what you're doing. I listen to whatever video you put on there, because I'm intrigued by, you're a business guy. You really a teacher. You just have so many, passions. You're an author. You're a public speaker. In this whole defining purpose idea, how do you is there a thorough way through those, or do you kind of say these are my purpose, or these are expressions of my purpose? Is there anything that's happening inside you that goes, I can be good at 20 things, but I should do one, or I can wrap my arms around these 20 things? Is there any wisdom for that? People be listening. Lots of people are like, I'm good at 5 things, and I'm trying to find this sense of, what do I do? That's kind of the question I'm trying to help answer for people listening.
Well, I can only answer that from my personal perspective, Kris. And for me, as life, as I get into my 50s, I'm 51, that, life is looking like it's going to have 3 major chapters in terms of career.
Yes.
The first is the sort of Christian memoir, learning to write, embracing that as a craft. That was hard earned. I mean, I was pretty darn poor until I was in my my 30s, and trying to figure out how to put words in front of each other, and that was great, and wrote a bunch of books, and those did well, and then felt that coming to an end. Not because I didn't want to write, I still loved it, but I also felt like if you write, I think I'd written 7 more or less Christian memoirs. They were really more topical books, but they had a memoir voice to them.
Yeah.
If you write your 8th memoir, you're a clinical narcissist, and you need to stop. Oh, the publisher kept wanting another one. I'm like, well, I don't want to be a clinical narcissist. I'm just a regular narcissist. I don't want to be a clinical one. So I ended up writing a business book about branding and marketing.
Yes.
Ended up selling hundreds of thousands of copies, and God was gracious to give me a second career in business.
That story brand book.
Yeah, the Building Story Brand book. And then what we did was, so many people liked that book and they wanted us to create their marketing. I just said, I don't really do that. But we started certifying marketers in our frameworks, and we ended up with I think we have 700 of those marketers all over the world. And now, in order to do that, I had to scale up a company into the millions and tens of millions, and had a big staff. And all of a sudden now I'm an entrepreneur running a staff, and figured out a more simple way to run a small business with using 6 different frameworks. Now that part of my career is about to happen in March of next year. I'll release a book called How to Grow Your Small Business, and we're certifying business coaches. But and so I'm in chapter 2.
Yeah.
Chapter 2, I kind of have a vision of getting my personal company up north of 100 million. And I want 2,500 small business coaches protecting and growing America's small businesses. There are 33 million small businesses in America. Wow. It's the number 1 employer in the country. Wow. 65% of those businesses will fail. And to me, small business is too big to fail. And so I want to raise an army to help them figure out how to grow. And then career number 3, which I'm starting to put a little investment in, is not to run for office, but to sort of affect the American political system. I think we're in a very dangerous place, both internally and externally. Internally, there's so much infighting. As you
Yeah.
know, people who hate each other don't tend to get much done.
No.
And so a buddy of mine who's a Blue Dog Democrat who I've known for many, many years, uh, he's a black guy, I'm a white guy. We're coming together to put together a 6-tier plan for America's future. And all we will do is go around and get people to sign the petition, and then present legislation to Congress that we can move forward on criminal justice reform, education, the economy, foreign policy, and a couple other things. I've been working behind the scenes as a messaging guy for a lot of politicians and a lot of political think tanks. Yeah. And so that's kind of been happening for a long time. So, I don't know, 3 chapters. And then quite honestly, man, I'm going to be really glad to get out of here. It's a lot of work. I'm going to go to heaven and fly around.
Yeah. You're probably not going to go to heaven real soon.
I'm hoping not. I got a 16-month-old daughter. I hope I'm here for a while.
I was going to say, you got a 4th career right there. You got a little girl right there. And then
that doesn't even count. Those 3 stories don't encompass what we all know life is really about, which is relationships and passing on mostly our love and God's love to the next generation. So that takes up now more of my time than anything else. But it honestly doesn't feel like work. I'm very, very grateful to have a wife, period. And I'm even more grateful to have a daughter, and for my life to have turned out this way. Betsy and I, we've had 3 or 4 arguments our entire marriage. There's no drama in our house. To be able to come home to peace and being restored, and hopefully she's restored with me, has allowed us to do all this other crazy stuff.
Yeah, I am echoing your relationship. I've been married 47 years. Been with my wife since she was 12, so we've been together, 52 years. And we have had, I share this all the time, we've had a few bad hours in our marriage, but never a bad day. Now, we've had lots of bad days, let me be clear. We've been through a lot, but not with each other. So, yeah, so that's
nothing against couples who have some tension and, have some drama. Our chemistry just doesn't do that.
Legacy, I didn't know this about you. For some reason, one of my team brought this to light. So if it's inaccurate, please fix it. She said that you were raised by a single mom. And I'm wondering, I just wrote a book on fatherhood called Uprising.
Yeah, I've been following some of your material on it.
Yeah,
so
and I'm wondering, how did you have a dad? Can you tell us that story and maybe how that fit into your journey of, you talked about pain, walking out of pain, giving your pain a purpose. I think I put those words, pain, a purpose, but having a vision for your pain. Tell me a little bit about that, because I'm so intrigued right now with fatherhood stories. As you know, you write a book, and you're not just writing a book; you're actually in this space.
Right.
So
I did the same thing. I wrote a book about growing up without a dad many, many years ago.
Did you?
Yeah, I did. It was called, they changed the name of it. Now it's called Father Fiction.
Oh, I have that book. I don't think I ever read the whole thing, though.
Yeah, same. Well, it's not that good. but
so funny.
Yeah, so my dad left our home when I was 2 years old.
Oh, wow.
So mom raised us on, we were standing in line for government cheese, and, we were very poor. And she did an amazing job. She's a heroic figure in my life. There was a guy down at the church, local Baptist church, literally walking distance from my house, named David Gentiles, who was a youth pastor, who was really, I say I grew up without a dad, but I kind of grew up with the best dad I could possibly imagine. And it was this guy down at the church. And, there's nothing, you can't replace a biological dad who's plugged in and a good man. But I didn't have that. So David Gentiles was kind of a father figure for me. And as I grew up, you'll love this. I mean, wrote some books and kind of became successful. I thought, well, whatever whatever issues you have growing up without a dad didn't happen to me. So I decided to go off on on one of the San Juan Islands and write a book about having grown up with a dad and kind of process the stuff. And in the process of writing that book, realized I was a complete basket case, and most of the issues in my life happened because I didn't have a dad, which is not a good position to be if you're trying to write a book to help people.
Exactly.
And so started to kind of work backwards through some of that stuff, and codependency and a lack of masculine identity, to some degree was a part of it. And then, oh, you'll love this. After the book came out, I realized the story's not over. I know I'm finished with the book and it's out, but I don't know where my dad is, and my mother never spoke of him. And
wow.
I did some digging and found him.
Oh my goodness.
I was in Chicago one night when I got word of where he was and who he was. And I literally called him that night and left him a voicemail and said, he was like 5 hours away in Indiana. And I said, hey, my name is Don Miller. I'm your son. And I'm going to get in my car tomorrow morning. I'm going to drive to Indiana. I'm going to see you.
Oh my
I did. He called me back while I was driving because I'm like, I'm going to go to the guy's house no matter what. If he's there, he's there. If he's not, he's not. I got nothing to do. And he called me and left me. I didn't answer the phone. I was so nervous, but I knew it was him. He left me a voicemail. He said, come on, I'd love to talk to you. Knocked on the guy's door. He invited me inside. We sat for about 3 hours. He talked 95% of the time. He had a beer in his hand and Fox News on the television. He never turned the television off. And he ended that conversation telling, he really what he was doing was trying to say, here's why I left and here's why we don't know each other.
Yeah.
At the end of it, he looked at me. He said, I owe you an apology. Will you forgive me? And I said, absolutely. And that was a major healing moment for me. Now, some people don't need to do that because got some dads who they're best. Let's keep it separate. But for me, that was a major moment. Again, the thing that really helped me, Kris, was I realized that this thing that had been over me for so long, this lack of sort of masculine approval, which is so important, I think, for us young men, that I realized this is just a guy. He's not God. He had his own confusion at the time. He had his own stuff going on. He didn't have any bearings. He made a big mistake, but this is not God leaving me. This is a guy who was young and immature who left. And for some reason, it was just very healing for me to walk out of there. And then I would also say, if you walk into any prison, most of those guys grew up without dads.
Oh yeah. 90 over 95% right now.
It's a bad deal.
Yeah.
There's another side to that, though. If you can seek the healing that you need to seek and be honest about it, just say, hey, there's stuff missing in my life that I need to see a counselor. I need to figure out what some of this stuff is. And if you're open to that, I think you can actually become an even better man. I think that's God's little bit of irony.
Yeah.
He'll take some sort of tragedy, and just like Viktor Frankl says, he'll turn you into a better person because of it. I only say that to say, I feel like if I hadn't grown up without a father, Kris, I wouldn't be so motivated to be a great dad to my daughter. And so there are things that I get because I went through that maybe I wouldn't have gotten if I don't think I wouldn't have a chip on my shoulder. I wouldn't have, worked so hard to write books or create a company. I mean, half the stuff I've accomplished because I'm trying to convince myself I'm a good dude. Right. So there's an upside to it if you seek, I think, the healing that God offers.
It's almost like the Johnny Cash song, The Boy Named Sue.
That's exactly it.
Have you listened to the whole song?
Oh yeah.
He's like, I named you this so you would be tough.
That's exactly it.
My father drowned when I was 3. You probably know that story. And I had a little bit different than you. I had 2 stepfathers who were very abusive and didn't like me. So I was gone by 17. I was out of the house, and thankfully both of them received the Lord years later. I wish they would have received the Lord much earlier. But yeah, I feel the same. I do miss my dad. You know, hey, I meant to ask you, how old were you when you connected with your dad?
Well, for 37,
And then did you stay connected? Did you guys stay connected?
we didn't. And that's been a question I've kind of had ever since, because I wasn't ready at the time to sort of take him into my life. I felt like he needed a lot from me, even in those few hours. And then we corresponded a little bit, and it just naturally sort of faded. But I felt like he needed a lot from me that I wasn't able to give. I was still trying to figure out who I was.
Yeah.
And so the story didn't go to this, we're good friends today and
Yeah.
that sort of thing. It didn't go there. It was also important for me to sort of not romanticize that journey so that I would have a good testimony at church, but to actually sit down and say, do you still need to protect your heart from this? And I felt like I did. There were some other things, Kris, that I won't get into, that I was very grateful that this particular man, who I believe is a very good man, but I was also very grateful that he was not my father, that he was not there,
Yeah.
because he had a way of viewing his kids that he had had in other relationships. And when I listened to how he viewed his kids, I was like, I don't want that guy viewing me, giving his opinion of me anytime soon.
You know, it's funny because obviously, I can't meet my dad. I'll see him in heaven. But I have this childhood, I'll call it a fantasy, that whenever something happens in my life, if it's really good, I have this fantasy that says, I wish my dad was alive. He'd be proud.
Yeah.
And when it's bad, I think, well, I would call my dad right now and he would know what to do.
Yeah.
And I sort of realize that it's a fantasy because I have a great family. My kids call me and I don't always know what to do. So in the absence of a father, I think that I'm processing out loud from your story. In the absence of a father, let's say a mother or somebody important in your life, you kind of build an image of what you think the relationship would be, and you sort of in your imagination live out of that, whether it's accurate or not,
Yeah, I mean, I think we all do that in other kinds of relationships too, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Comparing our marriage to some sort of fictional standard, those kinds of things. What's even more interesting to me is I study story and story structure, and then have leveraged it in a bunch of different kinds of ways.
You do.
One of the things that is true, and I was literally telling my wife this last night. We were watching a movie in bed. You prop up the laptop. We were watching a 20-minute. We can watch things 20 minutes at a time.
Yeah.
I told her this a million times, but almost every movie you see that's a single protagonist movie that is about one specific hero, almost every one of them you see, the screenwriters will make that kid an orphan. It's somehow their backstory, they are fatherless. And last night we were watching this old movie called Say Anything with John Cusack, like classic kind of coming of age teen rom-com that we saw online. And I said, Betsy, you gotta watch this. And sure enough, his parents are off in Germany doing something, and he's having to live with his sister. I said, see, he's an orphan. And I think even if you grew up with the greatest father in the world, there's a reason these screenplays are making everybody an orphan. It's because it's a universal human void. It's a universal human thing that we are without the father. And I have to overlay that over the fall of man and the separation that existed between God and man. Now, whether or not we have that reunion at the point we become a Christian, or whether there is a promise of that reunion and it actually happens at the wedding feast of the Lamb, I don't know. That's way over my head. But I think there's a spiritual reason that we all identify as orphans, even if you grew up with a great dad or a great mom. It's an interesting rabbit trail we could go down.
Yeah, it is. I so appreciate this conversation we're having. I so admire you, and I wish we lived closer so we can connect more often, because we have so many similar interests in that we're both authors. We both write about similar things. Actually, we both have a love for government and politics in a healthy way. We both have a passion to see wholeness and health come to our political, our governmental friends, which we both have, and we're both fathers who love kids. So
Yeah.
I just want to say thank you so much for being on here. I want to give a plug for your newest book. I know you said not necessary, but Hero on a Mission, A Path for a Meaningful Life. And I'm sure you can get that. I know you can get that on Amazon because my team bought that off of Amazon. Do you have another way that you'd rather that we bought that book?
No, Amazon works great for me.
That's great. And I also want to say your story brand book, I said this off camera, but I wanted to just give you a plug because if you guys, if you're in business or you're in an organization, in our case, we're a large church with a movement, we use that story brand as a part of, actually is the structure and strategy for all of the way we communicate. I'd call it marketing, but it's actually more of just telling your story and in a way that's not high pressure or high sales. It doesn't use manipulation. And I gave that book to one of my team who became my marketing leader. And that was probably 5, 6, 7 years ago. She read that book and said, "This is amazing. Hey, there's a course you can take." I assume there's still a course you can take.
Yeah.
She took that course and then she became our marketing leader. And now she's given that book to our entire marketing team in a $70 million multifaceted ministry. And all of our, every division of our ministry uses that book. So I just want to put a plug in for that book. I know that's an old book, but what you taught there works really well. And I want to thank you for that. And
Thank you. Thanks for using it, Kris. I'm glad to play a part.
yes. Is there a website? Oh, I see. Storybrand.com. Is that the website that you?
Yeah, that website will take you to all the messaging and marketing stuff that I do full time for a living. Hero on a Mission was a one-off book that I really felt called to write and wrestled with it for a long time and finally got it down. But I got more positive feedback from Hero on a Mission than anything I've ever done, but I make all my money off business books. So that's kind of how that works.
So thankful for you. And hey, tell Betsy I'd love to connect with her. And by the way, next time I go to see our friend in Tennessee, I will connect with you and see if we can have lunch or something together. I'd love to see what you're doing with Goose Hill because I've been following it from the beginning. And
yeah, we'd love to have you, Kris.
And I'd love to have you out again. So we'll see if we can do that too.
Sounds great. Anything to get to Northern California. It's beautiful up there.
Come on, baby. God bless you. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks, Kris.
Have a great day.
You too.